The first thing I noticed was not the man standing in my living room. It was my wife's smile, because it was the kind of smile a woman wears when she has already decided her husband is the smallest person in the room. I was still holding my keys when I opened the front door, still smelling like sawdust, cold air, and the black coffee I had been drinking since 5 that morning. The porch light buzzed behind me. The hallway lamp threw a soft gold line across the hardwood floor I had paid to refinish last spring. And there, beside the fireplace, standing like he had every right to be there, was Daniel Cross, my wife's ex-husband, one hand in the pocket of his expensive navy coat, the other wrapped around a glass from my cabinet. My glass. Emily stood next to him in a cream sweater I had bought her for our anniversary, her blonde hair curled over one shoulder, her face relaxed in a way I had not seen around me in years. She did not look startled when I walked in. She did not look guilty. She looked entertained. That was the part that settled cold in my chest. Not rage. Not panic. Something quieter. Something heavier. The kind of quiet a man feels when he hears a floorboard creak in a house he thought was empty. "You're home early," she said, like I had interrupted a book club meeting, not walked into my own house, and found her ex standing 10 feet from our wedding photos. Daniel smiled before I answered. He had the same polished look I remembered from the old pictures Emily used to keep in a box at the back of the closet, the one she claimed meant nothing. Tall, clean-shaven, silver watch, perfect teeth, the kind of man who looked like he had never carried a couch up 3 flights of stairs or patched drywall at midnight because a pipe burst behind the laundry room. "Good to see you, Caleb," he said, though we both knew it was not. "My name is Caleb Turner. I am 42 years old, born and raised outside Columbus, Ohio, a residential contractor who built his life one invoice, one permit, one aching back at a time. I have spent 20 years turning cracked foundations and empty lots into places people call home. I know what rottenwood looks like before it breaks. I know when a wall is carrying too much weight. I know how long a structure can pretend to be solid before the truth starts showing through the paint. What I did not know, until that night, was that a marriage can do the same thing. From the outside, Emily and I looked comfortable. 2-story house in a quiet neighborhood, 2 cars in the driveway, Sunday dinners with her sister, Christmas lights hung straight along the gutters every December. Neighbors waved when I drove by in my Ford F-250. They saw a dependable man and a pretty wife. They saw trimmed hedges, fresh mulch, and a porch swing that never squeaked because I fixed things before anyone asked. They did not see Emily turning her phone face down at dinner. They did not hear the way her voice changed when I walked into a room. They did not notice that she had stopped saying, "our house," and started saying "this place," like the walls had become a hotel she was tired of staying in. Daniel took a slow sip from the glass and glanced around my living room as if he were inspecting it for purchase. "Nice upgrades," he said. "Emily told me you've been busy." There was a little hook buried in those words, thin and shiny. I heard it. Emily heard it too, because the corner of her mouth lifted. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door. They landed with a small, clean sound. No slamming. No shouting. Men like me learn early that noise does not prove strength. Sometimes the loudest thing in a room is the decision not to react. "I have been," I said. Emily folded her arms. Daniel needed somewhere to talk. His hotel reservation got messed up. She said it smoothly, too smoothly, the way people explain something they rehearsed while looking in the mirror. "And you brought him here," I said. "For coffee," she replied. Daniel raised the glass slightly. It was not coffee. The silence after that stretched across the room, over the rug, under the framed photo from our 10th anniversary, around the couch where I had once slept sitting up with a fever because Emily did not want to catch it before a work conference. My eyes moved to the fireplace mantle. The deed envelope was not there, of course. It was locked in the small fireproof safe in my office, behind tax folders, insurance papers, and a stack of old blueprints. Nobody in that room knew what was inside it except me. Not Emily. Not Daniel. Especially not Daniel. And that was the only reason I smiled. It was small, barely there, but Daniel noticed. His eyes narrowed for half a second. Emily noticed too, and her confidence flickered like a bulb in bad weather. "What's funny?" she asked. "Nothing," I said, taking off my jacket and hanging it on the hook by the door. "I just think it's interesting who people invite into a house before they understand who owns it." Daniel's smile thinned. Emily's arms dropped slightly. For the first time since I stepped inside, The room felt less like a stage they had built for me and more like a trap they had accidentally walked into themselves. I looked from my wife to the man she had brought home, and I felt the old version of me, the one who explained, pleaded, and swallowed every insult to keep the peace, go still somewhere deep inside my chest. That man had carried enough. That man had fixed enough. Tonight, I was done repairing what someone else kept breaking. The room did not change all at once. It changed in small things. Daniel lowered his glass by maybe an inch. Emily stopped leaning against the fireplace and straightened her back. The old grandfather clock in the hallway clicked through 3 seconds so clearly I could hear each one land. I walked past them toward the kitchen, not because I needed anything, but because movement gives a man time to decide whether he is going to speak from pain or from control. The kitchen still smelled like the lemon cleaner Emily used when she wanted the house to look untouched. 2 wine glasses sat near the sink, one with a faint mark on the rim, one half full. A small plate of crackers and white cheddar rested on the island, arranged like she had company worth impressing. I looked at that plate longer than I should have. It was such a simple thing. Cheese, crackers, a towel folded over the sink. Ordinary items sitting in the middle of a moment that did not feel ordinary at all. "Caleb," Emily called from the living room, her voice lighter now, careful. "Do not make this weird." I almost laughed at that. Not because it was funny, but because it was familiar. That was one of Emily's gifts, taking a situation she created and handing me the blame for noticing it. "Do not make this weird. Do not overreact. Do not embarrass me. Do not ask too many questions." Over the years, those little instructions had stacked up like bricks until one day I realized I had been helping build my own silence. I opened the refrigerator, saw the untouched leftovers from Sunday, and closed it again. "I am not making anything," I said. "I just got home." Daniel stepped into the kitchen doorway with that easy confidence some men carry when nobody has made them pay for it yet. "I think there has been a misunderstanding," he said. He spoke slowly, like he was explaining a driveway repair to a child. "Emily and I go way back. We were talking about old times. Nothing more." Emily came up beside him, not beside me. That was another small thing, but small things tell the truth before people do. Her shoulder nearly touched his sleeve. Her eyes were on me, but her body had already voted. "Daniel is going through a rough patch," she said. "His lease fell through downtown, and he might need a place for a few days while he sorts things out." The words entered the room softly. A few days. A place. Sorts things out. I stared at her, waiting for the part where she heard herself. It never came. "Here?" I asked. "In this house." She sighed, that tired little sound that used to make me apologize before I knew what I had done wrong. "We have 2 guest rooms, Caleb. It is not a big deal." Daniel looked down, but I saw the smile he tried to hide. Not a wide smile. Not obvious. Just enough. The kind of smile a man wears when he thinks he has been handed another man's chair at the table. That was when something old opened inside me. Not anger exactly, but memory. I remembered the winter we bought this place, when the pipes froze 2 weeks after closing and Emily cried on the stairs because she thought we had made a mistake. I remembered working my regular job all day, then coming home and crawling under the house in 23-degree weather with a flashlight between my teeth and numb fingers wrapped around a wrench. I remembered the first summer, when the back deck sagged and I spent 6 weekends rebuilding it board by board while Emily picked paint colors and told her friends we were restoring character. I remembered every mortgage payment I made when her boutique consulting business was still a dream written in a notebook. I remembered the years I told myself sacrifice was love, and maybe it is, until the person receiving it starts mistaking it for weakness. "A few days," I repeated. My voice sounded calm, even to me. Daniel set his glass on the counter without asking. "Look, I do not want to be in the middle of a marriage issue." That sentence was polished, but it had mud on its shoes. He was already in the middle. He had walked in, taken a drink, stood next to my wife, and looked around my home like he was measuring the walls for his own pictures. Emily touched his arm lightly, just for a second. Maybe she meant to comfort him. Maybe she meant to wound me. Either way, it worked. Not on my temper. On my clarity. There are moments when a man stops asking why someone would hurt him and starts asking what the truth has been trying to show him all along. Mine came under recessed kitchen lights, beside a bowl of green apples, while my wife defended her ex with a softness she had not used on me in months. "You are right," I said. He should not be in the middle of a marriage issue. Emily's face relaxed, thinking I had surrendered. Daniel picked his glass back up. Then I looked directly at him. So let us make sure this is not one. The quiet came down fast. Emily blinked. Daniel frowned. I turned and walked toward my office at the end of the hall, past framed photos, past the linen closet, past the guest room she had apparently already offered him in her mind. Behind me, Emily's voice followed, sharper now. Where are you going? I did not answer. My office was small, 12 feet by 10, with shelves of permit binders, a scarred oak desk, and blueprints rolled in the corner like old maps to battles nobody remembered. I closed my hand around the safe handle beneath the bottom shelf and entered the code. The soft beep sounded louder than it should have. Inside were the papers that made some truths simple, not emotional, not debatable. Ink, signatures, county stamps, dates. I took out the envelope and held it for one steady breath. My name sat on the front in black marker, written by a title clerk 4 years ago. Caleb Turner. Sole owner. Separate property. I heard footsteps stop outside the office door. Emily was there. Daniel was behind her. Their reflections hovered in the dark window above my desk like two ghosts who had not yet learned they were already haunting the wrong house. I turned with the envelope in my hand, and Emily's eyes dropped to it. For the first time that night, she did not look entertained. She looked uncertain. And after years of being the man expected to absorb every shock quietly, I found that uncertainty suited the room just fine. I stepped out of my office slowly, holding the envelope like a shield and a key at the same time. The hallway felt longer than it should have, the polished hardwood stretching out under my feet with a soft echo of each step. Emily and Daniel lingered near the living room, the warmth of the overhead lights washing over them, but I noticed the tiny shifts in their posture, the subtle tightening of shoulders, the slight hesitation in their movements that I had not seen before. I did not rush to speak. I let the quiet fill the space between us like a thin fog. It was enough to let them feel the weight of my presence, the unspoken confidence that comes from understanding what you hold in your hands and what it represents. I moved toward the couch, set the envelope down on the coffee table with deliberate care, and straightened my jacket. The papers inside were not threats. They were clarity, proof of ownership, documentation that could not be debated, signed and recorded years ago when nobody outside the county clerk's office had reason to notice, and certainly not anyone standing in my living room tonight. Daniel glanced at the envelope, and for a fraction of a second, I saw his easy smile falter, replaced by a micro-expression of calculation. He was trying to read the room, trying to assess what kind of man he was facing. Emily, on the other hand, stared at the envelope as though she had just realized the rules of the game had changed. Her smile, which had been polished and rehearsed all evening, now wavered. I did not speak. I did not need to. The silence was my statement. I walked past them back into the kitchen, picked up a glass of water, and drank slowly, letting the cool liquid calm the subtle surge of adrenaline that had not yet eased from my body. Every step I took, every breath I drew, reinforced the idea that the power in the room had shifted quietly, without a word. Emily's eyes followed me, lingering on the glass in my hand, the envelope on the table, the calm in my posture. Daniel shifted, straightened his coat, and ran a hand through his hair, a small, unconscious gesture that betrayed his uncertainty. I returned to the living room, set my glass down, and looked directly at both of them. "It is a simple matter," I said, voice steady, even controlled. "Everything that is in this envelope is properly filed, recorded, and legally recognized. There is no dispute over ownership. Nothing here is open to interpretation." I allowed a pause long enough for the words to settle, for the tension to seep into the corners of the room. I watched as Emily's gaze flicked to Daniel, and Daniel's eyes darted back to her. The game they thought they were running, the quiet confidence they carried into my home, was beginning to unravel in ways that could not be reversed by rehearsed smiles or casual words. I continued, "All decisions regarding this property, this house, and any associated agreements are mine to make. That has not changed, and it will not change tonight." I could see Emily shift her weight, the first sign of real uncertainty since the evening began. Daniel's hand tightened slightly on the glass he held, the subtlest hint of tension. I did not raise my voice. I did not make any grand gestures. Everything I had accomplished over the past 20 years, Every invoice, every project, every painstakingly documented detail of my life was distilled into that envelope and presented calmly in the middle of my living room. That calm, measured approach made the truth heavier than any shouting could have. I stepped back and let the silence do its work. Emily blinked, once, twice. Her carefully maintained composure cracked in the smallest ways, a tightening of the jaw, a pause in her breath. Daniel shifted, a subtle step backward, recognition of the situation settling in. The quiet in the room became a tool, a mirror reflecting the reality of who held the real control. The house that had been a stage for their subtle provocations now felt like a chamber of reckoning. I stood in the middle of it, steady, unhurried, aware of the small details, the slight reflection of the chandelier on the polished table, the subtle hum of the refrigerator, the faint creak of the hallway floor, and understood that in those small details, clarity could be found. Emily's lips parted slightly, no words coming, and Daniel's gaze flicked to the envelope once more, this time with understanding. I did not smile. I did not gloat. The room was silent, but every particle of it communicated exactly what needed to be understood. Ownership, authority, and the quiet power of preparation, all distilled into one envelope resting on the coffee table between them, quietly asserting the truth without the need for further explanation. I felt the weight of years of careful work, patience, and persistence settling into the space, a subtle yet undeniable presence that could not be ignored. Daniel was the first one to speak, but even his voice had changed. It had lost that smooth edge, that easy tone he carried when he thought he was only visiting a weaker man's house. "Caleb, nobody is questioning your paperwork," he said, lifting one hand slightly, palm open, trying to look reasonable now that confidence had left him with no place to stand. "This is clearly a private matter between you and Emily." I looked at him for a long second. The grandfather clock clicked again. Somewhere outside, a car passed slowly along the street, tires whispering over damp pavement. The normal world kept moving beyond the windows, but inside my living room, time seemed to narrow around the three of us. "That is funny," I said. "A few minutes ago, you were comfortable enough to drink from my glass and discuss staying in my guest room." Emily turned toward him sharply, then back to me. "He never said it like that." "No," I said. "You did." Her face tightened, and for a moment I saw the woman I had met 14 years earlier under all that pride. Not softer, not sorry, just exposed. Emily had always been beautiful in a way that made rooms adjust around her. At 39, she still had that polished suburban elegance, the kind people complimented at fundraisers and school auctions even when we did not have children in the district anymore. White skin, blue eyes, blonde hair, a voice that could sound sweet or cold depending on what she needed. When we first met at a charity build for Habitat for Humanity outside Dayton, she wore jeans, a volunteer shirt, and sneakers that had never seen mud before. She had laughed when I showed her how to hold a hammer properly. I remembered the sun on her face that day, the smell of cut lumber, the way she said she admired men who actually knew how to build something. Back then, I believed her. Men like me are dangerous when we are young because we confuse being needed with being loved. I built shelves for her apartment before we were engaged. I fixed her mother's porch railing before I knew her middle name. I helped pay off a credit card she said embarrassed her. I put her name on Christmas cards, introduced her to clients, brought her flowers from grocery store buckets because she said expensive roses made her feel guilty. Little by little, I became the kind of man who showed love by making problems disappear. And little by little, Emily became the kind of woman who forgot the problems had ever existed. "You are making this dramatic," she said now, but her voice was thinner. "Daniel is going through a hard time. That is all. He needed help. I thought we were decent people." There it was. Decent. A word people use when they want you to surrender boundaries and call it kindness. I looked at Daniel. He was staring at the envelope again, and I could see the gears turning behind his eyes. He was not worried about decency. He was calculating exposure, embarrassment, leverage. I knew his type because I had worked for men like him in my 20s, developers who smiled at ribbon cuttings and squeezed subcontractors until families missed mortgage payments. Daniel had once owned a chain of boutique fitness studios around Central Ohio, the kind with black walls, loud music, and monthly fees that made people feel successful just for walking inside. Emily used to talk about him like he was a cautionary tale. too flashy, too restless, too obsessed with appearances. Then, sometime over the last year, his name started coming up differently. First as a joke, then as a memory, then not at all. That was when I should have paid attention. Silence is not always peace. Sometimes silence is where people hide construction equipment before they tear your life down. Tell me something, I said, turning to Emily. When did you invite him? Her eyes moved away for half a second. This afternoon. Before or after you knew I would be at the Riverside renovation until late. The room seemed to inhale. Daniel's jaw shifted. Emily folded her arms again, but this time it looked less like authority and more like defense. I checked your calendar, she said, because I did not want you to feel ambushed. I let the sentence sit there. Check my calendar. Did not want me ambushed. Words can wear church clothes and still lie through their teeth. I nodded once, almost to myself. So you planned the timing. That is not what I meant. But it is what happened. Her eyes flashed. Why do you always do that? You take one thing and twist it until I sound terrible. For years, that line would have worked. I would have backed up, softened my voice, tried to rescue the room from discomfort. I would have become a lawyer against myself, arguing for her intentions while ignoring my own pain. But something about seeing Daniel in my house had cut the last cord. I was no longer interested in proving I was fair to people who were not fair to me. I am not twisting anything, I said. I am repeating it. Daniel cleared his throat. Maybe I should leave. He said it as if leaving were his decision to make, as if he were granting us privacy instead of retreating from a room that no longer favored him. I looked at the front door, then back at him. That would be the first sensible thing you have said tonight. Emily's head snapped toward me. Caleb, what? My voice stayed calm. Did you expect me to offer him the blue guest towels? Daniel's face colored slightly, and his polished expression cracked just enough to show irritation underneath. That pleased me less than I thought it would. There was no joy in it. Only confirmation. The man did not feel ashamed to be here. He felt offended to be challenged. Emily stepped between us, not physically close, but emotionally enough for me to notice. You are humiliating him. The words landed clean. Not you are humiliating me. Not you are hurting us. Him. That was the second deed I saw that night. The first was in the envelope. The second was written in her loyalty, clear as county ink. I looked at my wife, and the room softened around the edges for a moment, not because I was forgiving her, but because grief has a strange way of arriving quietly when anger has already done the knocking. Emily, I said, you brought another man into the home I built, defended him before you defended me, offered him space under my roof, and now you are worried I might embarrass him. Her mouth opened, then closed. Daniel stared at the floor. The clock kept ticking, patient and merciless. I picked up the envelope from the coffee table and tapped it once against my palm. Not hard, just enough for the sound to remind them it was still there. You both should understand something before this night goes any further, I said. This house was never marital property. My father left me the original parcel before I married Emily. I rebuilt the structure with funds from Turner Custom Homes before our joint accounts ever touched a mortgage payment. The deed has always been in my name, and the post-nuptial agreement Emily signed in 2016 confirmed it. Emily's face changed completely. The color drained slowly, like someone had turned down the light behind her skin. That agreement was for your business, she whispered. It covered the house too, I said. Page 7. Daniel looked at her, and for the first time, he did not look like an ex-husband returning to familiar territory. He looked like a man who had followed a bad map into private land and just noticed the fence. Emily stepped back as the weight of the words settled between us, and I could feel the shift in the room before either of them spoke. Daniel's eyes widened just slightly, the kind of widening that betrays the realization that he has miscalculated more than one variable in a room he assumed he understood. The chandelier above cast fractured light across the hardwood, glinting off the glass Daniel still held, and in those tiny reflections I could see the tension solidify. I moved toward the couch, each step measured, deliberate, giving my presence a rhythm that demanded attention without a single raised voice. The air seemed heavier, yet clearer, as if everyone in the room knew a line had been drawn and could feel which side of it they were standing on. Emily's shoulders slumped fractionally, almost imperceptibly, but it was enough to reveal the unease that had been building since Daniel first crossed my threshold. I picked up a coaster from the table and set it down with deliberate precision, the small click echoing softly, more resonant than it should have been. Daniel shifted a step back, adjusting the cuff of his sleeve in an effort to maintain composure, yet failing to hide the subtle tension creeping into his posture. "I suppose you were not expecting this," I said, voice calm, steady, holding the kind of control that comes from knowing the smallest details can carry the largest weight. Emily's eyes darted between me and Daniel, searching, calculating, the polished veneer slipping in ways that even she could not immediately disguise. The room seemed to narrow, compress, making the ordinary details, the framed photographs, the small stack of books on the coffee table, the corner lamp casting soft light across the rug, feel like the stage of a very precise performance where every movement and expression mattered. I turned the envelope slightly in my hands, letting the slight rustle of the paper punctuate the silence, and I could see Emily's pupils dilate fractionally, a subtle signal of recognition, comprehension, and the beginning of panic. Daniel cleared his throat, once, twice, and for the first time since entering my house, his voice lacked the easy confidence he had worn so smoothly. "I was not aware," he began, then paused, realizing no continuation would change the facts before him. I did not interrupt. I let the quiet speak, every second reinforcing what had been established. Emily swallowed. She tried to find words that could soften the impact, that could create a narrative where she remained in control, but the envelope on the coffee table, the documentation it held, and the calm authority I projected rendered her attempts nearly irrelevant. I stepped closer, a measured approach that emphasized the distance between reaction and preparation, past the dining area where the hardwood reflected the soft glow of recessed lights, until I stood between the two of them and the hallway beyond, framing them visually and emotionally within the parameters I had defined. "Every agreement you believe gives you standing here has limits," I said, voice steady, carrying the weight of years of preparation and silent labor. "Every decision, every arrangement, every perception you hold is now subject to the clarity of fact." Daniel's lips parted slightly, the polite mask cracking to reveal a trace of incredulity, and Emily's hand touched her mouth briefly, as though to suppress the words she could no longer deliver. I took a single step back, allowing both of them to take in the space, the envelope, and the calm certainty that I carried. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the clock, the faint street sounds outside. All these ordinary noises underscored the extraordinary clarity in the room. "I do not need to prove my intentions," I continued, voice calm and controlled. "I need only to present the truth. Everything else is irrelevant." Emily blinked, a fraction too slowly, and Daniel's gaze flicked to her briefly before returning to the envelope. The room, once filled with casual conversation and understated confidence on their part, had narrowed into a moment defined by facts, clarity, and the quiet. Assertion of authority. No shouting, no confrontation, only the slow, deliberate unveiling of preparation, the kind that cannot be ignored, the kind that shifts perception in subtle, undeniable ways. I set the envelope back on the table, straightened the papers inside, and stepped back again. For the first time that night, the room felt balanced, but on terms only I had defined. Emily and Daniel exchanged a glance, brief, loaded with the weight of comprehension, and I understood that the dynamic had irrevocably shifted. The quiet had done its work. The clarity had done its work. The authority, calm and unyielding, had done its work. In that quiet, measured moment, I knew that the next steps for both of them would be dictated not by arrogance or assumptions, but by the unassailable facts resting quietly in my hands and on the table before them. I could see the hesitation in Daniel's posture before he even opened his mouth again, a subtle shift of weight from one polished shoe to the other, the micro-tension in his shoulders that spoke louder than words. Emily's gaze flitted between him and me, her lips pressed together as if to stop a sentence from forming, a gesture that betrayed uncertainty and a hint of fear she had not felt in a long time. I remained calm, letting the quiet hang like the still air before a storm, controlled and deliberate. Every tick of the grandfather clock, every hum of the refrigerator, and the soft creak from the hallway floorboards reinforced the reality of the room and the gravity of the moment. I walked slowly around the coffee table, the envelope now resting with absolute authority at its center, a tangible reminder of ownership, preparation, and the patient accumulation of facts that could not be disputed. "You are both here now," I said, my voice steady, smooth, carrying the weight of clarity and command. "And yet you are still trying to control perception instead of reality. That will not work here." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Emily, searching for guidance, reassurance, an anchor he could cling to. Emily did not provide it. Her hand hovered in the air for a fraction of a second before falling to her side. That single motion communicated the unraveling of the support structure Daniel had assumed existed. I moved toward the kitchen counter, picked up a glass of water, and drank slowly, deliberately, letting the liquid cool my throat while the room absorbed my presence and authority. Emily shifted her weight slightly, her eyes tracing the edge of the envelope as though trying to memorize every detail without touching it, while Daniel's gaze locked on the papers inside, calculation evident in every blink, every fraction of an inch his pupils adjusted. "Do you realize what this represents?" I asked, voice calm, deliberate. "This envelope is not just paper. It is clarity. It is preparation. It is the manifestation of every decision made, every step taken, every record kept that defines the boundaries of this home and everything within it. Nothing in this room can override these facts." Daniel swallowed, the action minute but audible in the still air. Emily's lips parted slightly, then closed as she searched for words that could alter a reality already set in motion. I stepped around the table, closer to them, and let my eyes meet both of theirs, conveying the inevitability of what had been established. "Comfort and familiarity do not equate to ownership," I continued. "Presence alone does not grant privilege. What is yours by assumption is not yours by fact, and the distinction has never been clearer than tonight." The silence deepened, the ordinary details of the living room, the polished floors, the framed photographs, the rug underfoot, the soft reflection of light from the chandelier, now became elements that framed the reality of authority. Emily's breathing shifted subtly, almost imperceptibly, and Daniel's posture stiffened. Each subtle motion reinforced the new equilibrium, the balance now resting not on confidence or pretense, but on documentation, preparation, and calm, unwavering assertion of control. I allowed a moment to pass, letting the quiet solidify the message without a single raised voice or gesture of force. "You will both understand," I said softly, each word deliberate, "that every assumption, every expectation you have brought into this house tonight is being measured against fact. Nothing more, nothing less. And fact, as it stands, is in my hands." Emily's eyes widened fractionally, and Daniel's expression shifted from composure to realization. The envelope remained central, silent, authoritative, the room itself seeming to contract around its significance. I turned and walked back toward the hallway, deliberately pacing in a measured rhythm, giving them space to absorb the weight of the truth, the authority, and the controlled assertion that had transformed the dynamic entirely. The quiet now worked as a mechanism of understanding, a subtle yet undeniable force that communicated everything necessary without a single shout, gesture, or escalation. Each tick of the clock, each soft reflection of light, each creak beneath my boots reinforced that clarity, preparation, and quiet command had won the first measure of the evening. Emily's shoulders dropped slightly, the tension releasing fractionally, and Daniel took a slow step back, the acknowledgement in his posture unmistakable. The house, once a stage for their confidence and casual manipulation, had become a chamber where fact, authority, and controlled presence redefined the room entirely. Daniel finally put the glass down, and this time he did not set it on the coaster. It touched the coffee table with a dull sound that made Emily flinch. Not because it was loud, because it was careless. There is a moment when a guest stops pretending to be a guest and reveals the entitlement underneath the manners. I had seen it on job sites with clients who smiled during walkthroughs, then tried to change contracts after the work was finished. Same eyes, same tone, same belief that rules were only firm until they became inconvenient. Daniel adjusted his coat, then looked at Emily instead of me. "You told me this was your home too," he said. The sentence landed harder than he meant it to. Emily's face tightened, and for the first time that night, her anger turned toward him. "It is my home," she said. "I live here." I nodded once. "You live here." "That is true." I let the difference hang there, Because difference is where truth hides. Daniel heard it. Emily heard it. The clock heard it. The walls I had painted, repaired, insulated, and paid taxes on for years seemed to hear it too. Emily looked at me with a flash of desperation dressed up as pride. You are not going to stand there and act like I was some guest in this marriage. Her voice shook at the edges, but she pushed through it. I picked the furniture. I hosted your clients. I helped make this place look like something respectable. That word again. Respectable. As if respect could be bought in throw pillows and dinner parties. I looked around the room, at the beige sectional she insisted on, the framed abstract print over the mantel, the candles she lit when people came over and forgot when it was only us. She had made the house beautiful. I would not deny that. But beauty is not the same as foundation. A vase does not own the table because it sits on top of it. You made it look nice, I said. I kept it standing. Daniel exhaled through his nose, a quiet little sound, more frustration than amusement. This is ridiculous. Caleb, I came here because Emily said you two were separated in every way that mattered. The room went still again, but this time the stillness moved through me like cold water. Separated in every way that mattered. 6 words, simple and polished, carrying months of hidden conversations behind them. Emily turned pale. I did not look at her right away. I watched Daniel, because sometimes the person trying to defend himself reveals more than the person trying to hide. Did she? I said. That is not what I meant, Emily said quickly. Too quickly. There it was again, that old emergency sentence. That is not what I meant. A tarp thrown over a broken window after everyone has already seen the rain coming in. I turned to her slowly. What did you mean? She swallowed. Her eyes moved to the family photos in the hallway, then back to me, as if she were searching the walls for a softer version of the truth. I meant emotionally, she said. I meant we have not been close. I meant you have been busy. You are always working. You come home tired. You barely talk. And I feel like I have been living with a man who only knows how to fix roofs and write checks. I felt that one. Not because it was fair, because it was familiar. Every man who works with his hands knows the strange insult of being punished for the labor that keeps the lights on. I had missed dinners. I had answered calls during vacations. I had gone to emergency repairs on Christmas Eve because a widow's furnace stopped working and the temperature was 12 degrees outside. I had come home with drywall dust in my hair and invoices in my pocket and thought provision was a language she understood. Maybe it was. Maybe she just stopped wanting to hear it from me. You should have said that to me, I said. Not him. Daniel shifted again, and this time his confidence cracked open enough for irritation to step through. I did not come here to be put on trial. No, I said. You came here because you thought the trial was already over. His eyes sharpened. Emily whispered my name, but I kept going, calm as a level pressed against a crooked beam. You thought she had already explained me away. The busy husband. The emotionally absent contractor. The man who would come home, be embarrassed, maybe argue, then sleep in the basement while you took the guest room and called it complicated. Daniel did not answer. He did not have to. His silence signed the statement for him. Emily's hand went to the back of the couch, fingers curling lightly into the fabric. You are making this sound uglier than it is. I looked at her, and something in my chest finally stopped trying to protect her from her own choices. No, Emily. I am making it plain. The words were soft, but they changed the air. Her eyes filled, not with tears exactly, but with the shine that comes when a person realizes charm is no longer steering the conversation. I picked up the envelope again and slid out one document, only one. The county seal was at the top. The ink looked ordinary. That was the thing about life-changing papers. They never glow. They never announce themselves. They just sit quietly until the moment they matter. I placed it flat on the table and turned it toward Daniel. This is the deed. My father transferred the land to me in 2009, 3 years before I married Emily. The renovation loan was paid through my company account. The post-nuptial agreement confirmed separate ownership in writing. There is no gray area. Daniel stared at the page. His eyes moved line by line, slower now, his mouth tightening as each sentence took something from him. Emily did not look. She knew enough from his face. That was the tiny justice of the moment. I did not need to explain it twice. So, I said, looking at Daniel, there will be no guest room. There will be no few days. There will be no quiet arrangement made in my kitchen while I am working late across town. Daniel's jaw flexed, but he kept his voice controlled. Fine. I will leave. Good, I said. Then I turned to Emily. And after he leaves, you and I are going to have the conversation you have been avoiding. Her breath caught. Daniel reached for his coat buttons, hands moving faster than before. The man who had walked into my home like a returning king now looked at the front door like it was the only honest thing in the room. Emily stared at me, and I could see the calculation changing into something heavier. Fear, maybe. Regret, maybe. Or just the shock of realizing I had not been blind. I had been patient, and those are not the same thing. Daniel's coat brushed against the doorframe as he stepped back, the movement small but significant, an acknowledgement that his plan had misfired. Emily's eyes followed him with a mixture of hesitation and disbelief, the carefully maintained composure she had worn all evening finally cracking in subtle ways. I watched them both, my posture calm, my voice steady, letting the silence expand in the spaces between us. That silence was not empty. It was filled with the weight of truth, patience, and the clarity that comes from being prepared. I moved to the center of the living room, past the coffee table where the envelope rested, tapping it lightly once with the back of my hand, the sound precise and deliberate. Understand this, I said, my tone calm, measured. Everything that is in that envelope is fact. Everything else is conjecture, assumption, or hope. It does not carry weight here. Emily blinked rapidly, her lips pressed together as she processed the words, her hands curling slightly at her sides. Daniel's shoulders sagged fractionally, the first real sign of acceptance that he had overstepped and that the space he had assumed was neutral was in fact governed by authority he had not anticipated. I walked slowly around the perimeter of the room, letting my steps punctuate the quiet, each footfall measured, a reminder that I controlled not through force, but through clarity, preparation, and presence. Emily's gaze followed me, her eyes tracing my movements with an intensity that betrayed both surprise and apprehension. Caleb, she said, voice slightly trembling. I did not realize. No, I interrupted softly. You did realize. That is why you brought him here. That is why you framed the conversation the way you did. The timing, the placement, the casualness of it all, it was deliberate. Daniel shifted, eyes flicking toward Emily, then back to me, the faintest edge of tension threading through his otherwise polished composure. Emily's hand rose slightly, almost as if to steady herself on the couch, then fell back to her side. I looked at her directly, holding the space between us with the same calm precision that had defined the evening thus far. What matters, I continued, voice unwavering, is not what you intended. What matters is what happened. What happened is that I hold the authority, the preparation, and the clarity. You are guests here tonight, and facts dictate your movements. The soft hum of the refrigerator, the subtle ticking of the grandfather clock, even the faint breeze moving through the slightly open window, all became part of the environment reinforcing the certainty I projected. Emily's shoulders sank slightly, and Daniel's hand flexed at his side as he stepped toward the door. I did not need to say anything more. The envelope, the documents inside, the deliberate calm I projected, all communicated enough. Daniel's footsteps echoed as he passed the kitchen, a measured retreat, each step slower than he had intended, until the front door clicked softly behind him. Emily turned to look at the door, then at me, and in that gaze, I saw the first real recognition of the evening's truth, a comprehension that had nothing to do with apology and everything to do with clarity. I walked back to the couch, picked up the envelope, and held it gently in both hands, a symbol not of threat, but of the order and preparation that governed my life. Tonight, I said, voice low and calm, has revealed much. Decisions, intentions, and assumptions are now measured against facts. That is the only foundation that will guide us forward. Everything else is noise. Emily did not respond immediately. She simply nodded, a small, quiet gesture that acknowledged both the truth and the authority in the room. The clock ticked, the lights cast soft shadows across the hardwood, and for the first time that evening, the house felt like it belonged entirely to the structure and preparation I had built, not the assumptions or ambitions of anyone else. The quiet settled around us like a tangible presence, reinforcing the authority, clarity, and patience that had guided every step of the evening. The front door had closed, but Daniel's presence still lingered in the room like the smell of smoke after a candle is blown out. Emily stood near the couch, staring at the place where he had been, her face pale under the soft living room lights. Outside, his car engine turned over, low and expensive, then rolled away from the curb with the same quiet arrogance he had brought through my doorway. I listened until the sound faded down Maple Ridge Lane, past the neighbor's mailbox, past the oak tree I had trimmed every spring, past all the little details that made a street feel safe, until one evening proved safety was only a story people told themselves. Emily turned back to me. "Caleb," she said, and my name came out differently than it had earlier. Not sharp, not annoyed, not dressed in that impatient tone she used when she wanted me to feel simple. It came out small. I hated that it still reached something in me. 14 years of marriage does not disappear because one door closes. Love does not shut off like a breaker in the basement. It sits there in the dark, humming, even after you know the wiring is bad. I placed the envelope on the coffee table again, but this time I did not touch it for effect. I was tired, not physically, though my shoulders ached from the Riverside job and my boots still carried dust from unfinished drywall. It was a deeper tired, the kind that settles behind a man's eyes after he realizes the argument he has been avoiding has been happening without him for months. Emily folded her arms, then unfolded them, unsure what shape to take now that Daniel was gone. "I was wrong to bring him here," she said. The words were correct, but they sounded like a person reading the first line of an apology and hoping the rest would not be required. I looked at the family photos in the hallway. Our wedding picture in Cincinnati, a lake trip near Geneva, a Thanksgiving where my mother was still alive and Emily had held her hand during grace. Proof that this had not always been ugly. Proof, too, that history can be real and still not be enough. "Why did you?" I asked. She looked at the floor. "I wanted you to feel something." That sentence hit quieter than an insult and deeper than a confession. "You wanted me to feel what?" She wiped under one eye with the side of her finger, careful not to smear her makeup, even then. "Jealous. Afraid. Awake. I do not know." I nodded slowly. In construction, when a wall starts bowing, homeowners always say it happens suddenly. It never does. Pressure builds for years. Moisture gathers behind paint. Soil shifts. Nails loosen by fractions. Then one day, everyone acts shocked when the crack finally shows. Our marriage had been cracking in fractions for a long time. The problem was not only Daniel. He was just the ugly line where the damage became visible. "You could have told me you were unhappy," I said. "I tried." "No," I answered. "You hinted. You punished. You got quiet. You made jokes at dinners. You turned every conversation into a weather report and then blamed me for not seeing the storm." Her face tightened because truth rarely feels gentle when it arrives without decoration. She sat on the edge of the couch, hands clasped together, looking less like the woman who had stood beside Daniel and more like someone who had wandered into the aftermath of her own decision. "You are always so calm," she whispered. "Even now, it makes me feel like I do not matter." That almost broke me, because for a second I wanted to explain everything. I wanted to tell her calm was not absence. Calm was the discipline I learned from a father who could lose everything and still show up to work at 6 in the morning. Calm was how I paid bills when projects stalled. Calm was how I sat beside my mother through chemotherapy appointments and signed forms with a steady hand. Calm was not proof I did not care. It was proof I cared enough not to destroy the room with my pain. But I had spent too many years translating myself for someone who never bothered to learn the language. "My calm kept this house peaceful," I said. "You mistook it for permission." Emily closed her eyes. The clock ticked. The refrigerator hummed. Somewhere upstairs, the heat clicked on, and warm air moved through vents I had installed myself after the old system failed during that bitter January cold snap. This house carried my fingerprints in places nobody saw. Behind trim. Under floorboards. Inside walls. Maybe that was why tonight hurt so much. She had not only brought Daniel into our marriage. She had brought him into the one place where my sacrifices had a physical form. "What happens now?" she asked. I looked at the envelope, then at the stairs, then at my wife. The old me would have softened the edge of the answer before giving it. The old me would have offered reassurance I did not feel, a bridge she had not earned, a door she had not respected. I was not that man anymore. "Tonight, you sleep in the guest room," I said. "Tomorrow, you call whoever you need to call. Your sister, your attorney, a counselor, I do not care. But Daniel does not come back here. Not for a conversation, Not for a suitcase, not for closure. Her lips trembled. And us. The word hung between us, fragile and late. I breathed in slowly, feeling the full weight of 14 years, the good and the ruined, the laughter and the small betrayals, the repairs I could make and the ones I could not. Us depends on whether there is anything honest left after tonight, I said. She nodded once, but it looked more like surrender than agreement. I picked up the envelope and carried it back to my office. The safe beeped softly when I opened it, then again when I locked it. Such a small sound for something that had changed everything. When I returned, Emily was still on the couch, staring at her hands. I did not comfort her. I did not punish her. I simply walked to the front door, turned the deadbolt, and switched off the porch light. For the first time in years, the house felt quiet without feeling weak. And as I stood there in the darkened hallway, I understood something I should have learned long ago. A man can spend half his life building shelter for someone, but the day they invite disrespect through the front door, he has every right to protect the foundation.